On a small farm, in dense thickets of burdock, the mother duck found a cozy place to build her nest. She waited for the chicks to hatch. One sunny morning, the eggshells crackled and tiny fluffy ducklings were born. There was only one egg left, the largest one that did not want to crack. The duck began to worry that something was wrong with him. She sat down on the egg again and decided to wait a little longer. The duck mom gave all the heat she could. She thought that this chick must be the most beautiful since she has been incubating him for so long. Soon a chick hatched from the last egg, but it did not look like the rest of the ducklings at all. It was much larger, and its feathers were gray. The duck mom was upset to see such an ugly son. But she hoped that someday he would become like his fellows. The rest of the ducklings laughed at him. They considered him disgusting and did not want to play with him. The next morning, the mother duck went with her children to the lake. To her surprise, the ugly duckling swam as well as others. The duck then brought her little ones to the poultry yard to introduce them to society. She told the ducklings about the rules of behavior with local inhabitants. The duck presented its brood to the noblest fat drake, but he attacked the ugly duckling, and she was forced to protect her failed chick. Fat Drake ordered to drive the freak out of the yard. Mother assured that he would grow up and become like other ducklings. Unable to withstand the bullying and humiliation, the ugly duckling left the poultry yard. In search of a safer place, he came across a beautiful lake, on which there was no one. And the duckling decided to stay here to live. Time has passed. Despite his loneliness, the ugly duckling was happy that no one offends him. And then one day, a beautiful white bird with a long neck flew to his lake. The ugly duckling did not know what kind of bird it was, but he looked at it with admiration. He loved her with all his heart. How a duckling would like to be like this lovely white bird. Winter came and it started snowing. The ugly duckling saw white snow for the first time. He was delighted with this sight. But due to the fact that the winter was very snowy, it was very difficult for the duckling to find food. He had to walk around the neighborhood in search of food. He was cold and tired. So the ugly duckling got to the farmer's house. When the peasant saw a thin and unhappy chick, he felt sorry for him. The farmer decided that he would keep the duckling with him until he was fattened and matured. Spring has come. The owner took good care of the chick, and he grew up a lot. The duckling already needed a lot of space, and the farmer decided to release him to the lake. Standing on the shore of the lake, the ugly duckling looked at his reflection in the water. And he could not believe his eyes. He could not recognize himself, and thought that there was someone else behind him. And then the duckling realized that the wonderful bird in the reflection is himself. To celebrate, he thrashed and swam all over the lake from edge to edge. And suddenly he saw the same beautiful white bird with a long neck, which he had seen once before. The ugly duckling decided to swim closer to her. But the beautiful bird was not frightened, but on the contrary she smiled and winked, and together they swam across the lake. The ugly duckling couldn't believe his happiness. Passing by, a fat drake on the shore of the lake said that he had never seen such a beautiful young swan in his life. What was his surprise when he found out that the ugly duckling that he once drove from the poultry yard was a beautiful swan. It turns out that the ugly duckling was a swan from the very beginning. An egg accidentally fell into a duck's nest. And when the beautiful young swan returned home, then everyone in the poultry yard became very ashamed that they had once offended him because of his appearance. Not having stayed at home for a week, Lemuel Gulliver set off on another trip on the ship Good Hope. But after a few days the ship was overtaken by the pirates. They hijacked the ship and tied up the entire crew. Gulliver tried to escape, so as punishment, the pirates dropped him in a boat to the will of the waves and winds.
Oh no!
For a long time Gulliver circled the open ocean, until he noticed land on the horizon. He swam to the shore and began to survey the land.
What?
Suddenly a huge shadow covered the sun. Raising his head, the astonished Gulliver saw a large island soaring in the sky. Exhausted by hunger and thirst, Gulliver began to scream, waving his hat, hoping that the inhabitants of the island would notice him. Then the natives took pity on Gulliver and lowered the stairs, so that he could climb the island. When Gulliver climbed the stairs, he found a crowd of very strange locals in front of him. Their heads were tilted to the right or left, with one eye looking inward and the other upward. And at each noble person there was a servant who patted the owner on the lips or ears, distracting him from his thoughts. Gulliver received a warm welcome.
Nice.
He was fed in the palace, and even had a tour of the island. So, Gulliver realized that the earth soars in the sky due to a huge magnet, and at the base there is a giant diamond.
Okay.
But life in the Flying Kingdom was boring, so Gulliver soon returned to Earth. Before his eyes was a devastated country where local residents, dressed in rags, were starving. As it turned out, these people did everything in their lives the other way around. They built a house starting from the roof.
Oh, no.
They tried to get the sun's rays from cucumbers.
What?
And the artists were blindly mixing paint for paintings. Local scientists did not understand why words are needed in a language. After all, to everyone who began to argue, they simply cut out the brains and swapped them. Gulliver's surprise knew no bounds, and he hastened to leave the island. Going to neighboring lands, Gulliver found himself in the kingdom of darkness and gloom. Trembling with fear, he continued his journey. Suddenly a ghost appeared from the darkness. In fright, Gulliver tried to hide, but the spirit noticed him. He beckoned the traveler with a gesture, and Gulliver had no choice but to follow the ghost. Very soon they reached a large castle, and Gulliver was invited to a reception with the king. Walking through the castle, Gulliver saw hundreds of ghosts who cooked dinner, cleaned and guarded the chambers. It turned out that this country is ruled by a powerful sorcerer who can raise the dead. And all the living dead serve him. The wizard received Gulliver with honors. And to entertain such a rare guest, he began to revive anyone whom Gulliver asked. They were great warriors, sages, and even primitive people. But tired of wandering, Gulliver thanked the wizard and soon left the kingdom of darkness. He went to the nearest port, where he hoped to board a ship bound for England. Walking around the port, Gulliver immediately attracted attention. A foreigner in such places was a rarity, and therefore Gulliver was mistaken for a spy, seized and urgently taken to the local ruler. The foreigner was immediately found guilty. And as punishment, Gulliver had to crawl across the throne room on his stomach, licking the floor in his path. This was the custom. At the end, Gulliver bowed to the monarch 7 times, hitting his head on the floor. Then the governor looked thoughtfully at Gulliver, and then pardoned him. Miraculously freed, Gulliver ran out of the castle, and went to the nearest port, where he boarded an English ship. I must say that Gulliver never returned to these parts.